Good morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, whatever time you are listening. Welcome back to the Feisty Performance Podcast. I am your host, Sara Gross. And today we have a super exciting guest host. Actually, over the coming weeks and months, we're going to have 3 or 4, maybe, we're working on a 4th, mini series of topics where we can go more in depth. So this first series, it's going to be 3 episodes, right, Jill?
Yes, 3 episodes.
3 episodes. We're going to be talking about youth coaching, in particular, coaching girls and teens and tweens. And our guest host is Jill Colangelo, and she is a researcher in forensic psychiatry with a focus on sports psychiatry at the University of Bern in Switzerland. She is a former collegiate athlete, triathlete, and ultramarathoner who has been mentoring overtrained athletes for almost a decade. Her academic work has been featured in outlets like Slate, Men's Health Magazine, Triathlete, Ultra Running Magazine, iRunFar.com, and on multiple podcasts, including here on the Feisty Performance Podcast. Maybe a couple years ago, did we first talk?
I think so. It feels like it was yesterday, but yeah, what is time? Yes, it was a long time.
No, weeks, months, years, it just blurs. But in any case, so happy to have you here as a guest host and excited to record with you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
What are we talking about today?
Yeah, so today we are talking about coaching girls in sports. And to be honest with you, we got a round of questions from parents and other people who wanted to know more about this topic. And probably to no one's surprise, the bulk of the questions were around eating disorders and disordered eating and how we can prevent this, or how we can really start talking about this in a way that's impactful for our young athletes.
I'm a little surprised on one hand that we still have so many questions about eating disorders with young people, especially young girls. I wish it was changing faster, I think is maybe it's not surprise, but just kind of this wish that like the culture was changing a little faster, that we didn't have this, like we're going to talk about today, like body focus, still heavily messaged to our girls. At the same time, as the mom of a 14-year-old who's recently become interested in veganism and other types of dietary questions, is like, yes, I completely understand how parents might be asking, hey, listen, how do we talk to our girls, especially in sport?
Yeah, I think it's an important question to ask because I think a lot of our parents are asking the same questions to themselves. And they're wondering about their own body image. And in the world we live in, where it just seems like we are inundated constantly by chatter about bodies and who looks a certain way and what that represents. And we, as a culture, attach so much meaning to someone's physical presentation and aesthetics. And so this is a really complicated question. So for that reason, the 2 guests that I invited to talk about this with me are people that I thought would offer a different view of what this looks like in real life.
I had the privilege of watching the interviews yesterday. Tell us who we're talking to today.
Yeah, so I do a lot of research on eating disorder and disordered eating. And one of the things that I notice a lot in the research is that the voices that we're hearing are of the researchers, coming up with all these possible reasons why this is happening, possible solutions, but we don't often hear from the athletes themselves. And when we do, they're typically in a collegiate setting because that is where research is happening. Unfortunately, we don't hear from the young girls where these kind of habits and behaviors begin. And so I invited a young woman named Sarah Naticchia. She is a person who struggled with disordered eating in high school and collegiate cross-country and track teams. She's a senior at Harvard right now, and she's studying neuroscience where she researches eating disorder. And her plan is to continue that research into eating disorder. She's amazing, and she's just so forthcoming and just such a delight. So I talked to her about her experience, and I asked her some real specific questions. Let's go back to the beginning of kind of when you started to have the experiences that you had in high school, yes?
Yes, started in high school.
All right, and what year of high school?
So I actually got a slower start to running. I began running my sophomore year of high school on the indoor track team, so not even cross-country team. So that endurance aspect was like kind of missing when I originally started. But I would say the disordered eating started
my junior cross-country season. So it took me about 6 months of being involved in the sport to begin developing disordered eating.
And what kinds of pressures were you feeling? What would you say now looking back was kind of the catalyst?
So on the surface, I feel that the primary pressures were attaining my desired results and performance goals, but they came from a more internal, deeper problem of me telling myself that my worth was contingent on these results. And a big part of that was reinforced and perpetuated by distance running culture and the stop at nothing pressure to succeed. I think in endurance athletics, achievements are very on paper. They're very easily recognized and easily celebrated by times, podium results, placements. So as opposed to more team-oriented sports where your personal impact in a game can be more subjective, running is very different, where it's all you, the results are on paper. And that can become very pressurizing and can enforce extreme discipline to achieve results at any cost. So there's definitely a cultural problem. And I also think it's very much reinforced by the people involved in the sport, other athletes, parents, coaches, and the like.
Interesting. Okay, let's get into that a little bit. So when you say culture, let's be more specific here. Was it from other athletes that were they on your team or were they on the teams that you would compete with? And what did that pressure look and feel like? What is a memory that you have that really encapsulates that feeling of pressure coming from other people?
I think especially early high school, mid-high school, peer influence is one of the strongest influences going on. So I do think that my fellow athletes on the team definitely played a role in the pressures I was feeling. Like I remember very specifically one cross-country practice my junior year of high school. We were all stretching before a run, and there was dialogue about, oh, like, Sarah, you're getting these times, but you don't have abs. Like, you're the only person on the team that doesn't have a six-pack. What's going on? Like, that was specifically said out loud. And there's also a lot of dialogue about, like, I remember specifically on a run, someone said, oh my God, I had 4 Oreos last night, but we have a race on Friday. Like, I feel so guilty. So there was constantly this chirping. But other parents of teammates had a surprising impact on my mental health, which I think I undervalued and I kind of wasn't aware of until I stepped away from sport and did some reflection on my past. I remember comments being made about my body from other parents. They would come to races, and obviously parents want their children to be successful. They, especially in the sport of running where people are very much pitted up against one another, parents see how other kids are performing, they compare their children to them. Maybe there's talk between parents to see what they're doing to allow their kids to perform in a certain way. But parents would make comments like, oh, Sarah, you look different this season. Oh, Sarah, you look like you gained weight. Oh, Sarah, you look like you lost weight.
This is other parents saying this to you specifically. Are they in front of your parents? Is this like at a practice or a race type of situation?
So the comments that I've heard that were said about me were said to their daughters and relayed to me.
Okay.
So I just think like it's normalized in a body-centric sport to have conversations about bodies. And to my surprise, like parents are tuned in as much as the kids themselves are.
Wow. Okay. That's very interesting information. I think that many of the parents listening to this will find that very interesting. Let's just jump ahead since we're talking about parents here. I had asked you to think about some of the ways in which your parents kind of facilitated you getting help and understanding that there was something not right with you. So tell me a little bit about how they were able to reach out and help you.
Yes. So I am lucky enough to say that I grew up with 2 sisters, a mom and a dad. Very female heavy family. And I'm aware that many mothers, especially like this generation, have the quote unquote term like almond mom, like raising your kids to be super orthorexic in a way, like focused on health, eating very little, and modeling this behavior to their children, and even like negative self-talk about body image. I think a lot of young girls can relate to their mothers speaking negatively about their own bodies and internalizing that and growing up with that dialogue and putting those pressures on themselves. I'm lucky enough to say that my parents modeled very healthy relationships with food. My sisters did the same. And I think that was one of the best things they did, was just behavioral modeling purely. I saw them eat a variety of foods, variety of quantities, and pursue their own life goals and see that the amount of food or what they were eating had nothing to do with their accomplishments. And I think that was very important for me to see. And it helped me break this rigid association I had built in my brain that my body, what I was eating, was directly tied to my accomplishments and my results. So family became super important to me in that way. I do think still there were some missed signs of my own disordered eating that I recently talked to my mom about this, and I said, so what were some things that I did that you weren't aware were signs of disordered eating at the time? And a big thing was when I struggled with disordered eating in high school and in college on my cross-country and track and field teams, I was still eating 3 meals a day. I never engaged in any purging behaviors. I was not making myself throw up. I was not taking laxatives. So it very much did not fit the portrayed image of disordered eating, of anorexia, of restriction. But of course, I was still under eating due to my high energy expenditure and exactly what I was eating. I was not meeting my personal needs, but it didn't look on paper like what the media portrays as anorexia. This makes it super difficult for a parent to identify this. And I remember when I was trying to get my period back, I lost my period for a total of 3 years during this time. I had several doctor's appointments to address this. One doctor looked me straight in the face and said, "You need inpatient eating disorder treatment. Like, this is severe enough for you to pursue this treatment." And my mom was like, "This is so extreme. This is crazy. She's not that sick." And whether or not I was at the time, it's okay now because I'm healthy. But I think there's a big misconception about what is a full-blown eating disorder versus, and what warrants inpatient treatment versus what is just like, oh, it's just disordered eating, or
Just disordered eating.
yes,
Right.
Like there's a big disconnection here.
Yeah.
And I think parents need to be more aware that any level of disordered eating or eating disorders requires psychological attention and treatment.
Right. I think that's an excellent point, because there is sort of this feeling that, am I sick enough? Right. We've seen
Yes.
that conversation happen a lot. Am I sick enough? Am I sick enough to need any type of intervention? And you and I both know that if you have to ask if you're sick enough, guess what? It's time to seek out help from a qualified healthcare practitioner. Parents obviously the kids are under a lot of pressure, and parents are under a lot of pressure to get their kids into college. Budgets are tight. College is expensive. Some of us, your parents' age, are still trying to pay off our college debt. So when a young person is looking to go to college, it looks like they could get a scholarship for running, and a lot of it is kind of resting on their shoulders, and this could be an issue. Do you have any kind of advice? Like, what would you say to parents about the pressure that they may be inadvertently putting on their kids, or their kids are putting on themselves in order to be able to afford college? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. It's a very complicated issue. I think when I was going through the recruiting process and when I was struggling with disordered eating in high school, a big pressure was committing to a college team. And a big justification I had for continuing my habits was, okay, if I just run this time, I can get to this school, XYZ. I think from a parent to an athlete, it's important to remind your kid to stay present, stay grounded in the moment, take it day by day. If results come, they come. If you run certain times to reach a certain scholarship for a certain school, it was meant to be. But forcing that is not okay. And forcing that oftentimes will lead to your kid going to college for a sport and having to quit or having to leave because what they did to attain those results was not sustainable. So sustainability is the key for long-term happiness in your kid and longevity in other areas of their life. It's not just sports and scholarship that matters as much as financial pressures can be a very real thing. If you're looking for scholarship and money, there's also scholarship and money in academics. There are other ways to get financial support from schools, and forcing it through unhealthy behaviors in athletics is not a valid avenue.
Right. Okay. Couple of quick questions before we wrap up. So what would you say is the most helpful thing your parents ever did in like one sentence for you through this process? What was like be top of the line if there was like a moment or something very specific that you could think of that was the big moment?
They did an excellent job of highlighting my strengths outside of athletics. I think parents are in a unique position where they grew up with you, or for most cases, they've seen you from when you were born to present day, and they have seen all phases of your life, all the times you've expressed personality, all the times you've expressed strengths in different areas. They did an excellent job reminding me of I'm a person first. I have all these strengths within me, and the external performance validation means nothing at the end of the day. It's very low-hanging fruit compared to what I have in my personality that's actually going to propel me to achieve long-term goals.
And anything they could have done better, let's be honest?
I think naturally and out of love, they expressed a lot of concern about my body, and lots of conversation and lots of dialogue were body-centric. And at the time, that's all I was thinking about. My body was my 100% of my brain at all times. So their concern, although it was coming from a place of concern, the dialogue that was specifically body-centric was only digging me into a deeper hole. All the comments about my body specifically continued this narrative that my body is the number one thing in my life and it has to be my focus and it's centered. So as much as possible, don't have your comments of concern be body-centric.
Any other words of advice for parents maybe wondering if their kids are going through something like this?
Again, don't let your child boil their identity down to one thing. Don't let them be completely swallowed by one facet of their life. And if there's potential that you think your kid may already be struggling, remind yourself that patience is key. Irritability is very common in those instances. Pushback is very common in those instances. And mixed with teenage years, rebellion is very common in those instances. So the advice that you're going to be giving, or even out of concern and love, there very well may be pushback, and just keep trying to help, keep trying different avenues of help, and hopefully there will be success.
Hey, feisty people. CEO Sara Gross here. I want to tell you about my favorite product for muscle strength and recovery, which has also become a favorite amongst all of my friends at CrossFit, Previnex's Muscle Health Plus. A few months ago, I started using it during my lifting sessions. We call it red juice at CrossFit, and it has helped my power, speed, and I've even put on some muscle mass, which has typically been really, really hard for me as an ex-endurance athlete. Muscle Health Plus contains creatine monohydrate, of course, but it also contains branched-chain amino acids and essential amino acids, plus some even more cutting-edge ingredients like HMB and estrogen, all of which are scientifically shown to increase muscle growth, recovery, and strength. So basically, it's a convenient, all-in-one formula that goes way beyond creatine alone. Unlike most supplement brands, Previnex tests everything with pharmaceutical-grade precision, and they also offer a 100% money-back guarantee. Try Muscle Health Plus today, and you can get 15% off your first order with the code PERFORMANCE at Previnex.com. That's performance for 15% off at Previnex.com.
Jill, one thing I have to say on the positive side is I am so heartened by people like Sarah and the work that she's doing and her willingness to share her experience. That is one thing. I think we talked in the intro about how sometimes we don't see much change in the culture, diet culture and the body image culture, but actually I have met now a lot of young women who are studying these things, right? Literally taking it into their studies at places like Harvard University that, 20 years ago would have never been looking at women-specific questions. And really, I think we're out of that entire process. We're going to have a whole lot more research done and a whole lot more insight into what's actually happening. So I'm just very excited when I hear from people like her.
I am too. I think, unfortunately, it is unfortunate that we have to continue this research, but I am at least happy that the people who are behind the research are people who have first-person account of it and therefore know where to direct those conversations. I just thought that some of the stuff that she talked about was really, honestly, I don't want to use the word heartbreaking, but some of the stuff that she said was truly heartbreaking to me. It seems like when she used words like body-centric conversation, like she was very body-centric about running, right? That she tied running with a look of a body. And that just absolutely kills me as a lifelong athlete. And I'm sure you feel the same way too. Like to have it all boiled down to aesthetics just feels so unfortunate.
Yeah, I think, that actually stood out to me as well, where she described running as a body-centric sport. And I was like, wait, isn't running a speed-centric sport? Like, what are we centering, right? Like, we should be centering speed. And then there's all the like performance. I'm thinking of a wheel with different spokes coming off. Like there's all the different spokes that lead to a performance, but actually it's the fastest person from A to B. So what do we need to get there? And having good lean body mass is maybe one thing, but it's way overemphasized to the point that like sometimes we see it as everything. Like I will not run fast unless I look a certain way. I also really liked where she was talking about how actually like parents' attitudes towards their own bodies really comes through to the kids, right? So like parents' comments, and even things like the way that they talk about like their own bodies, the way they talk about kids' bodies. And I think for parents, the main thing, my 2 cents is the main thing is to really explore how you feel about your own body, because your child is going to pick that up regardless. Yeah. Right? Like they are going to know how you feel about your body. They're smart, whether you say things or not.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And it's such a deeper issue too, because in that stage of life, there is a confluence of things happening, right? There's this struggle to sort of define the self. There is a struggle to demonstrate achievement. We've got to get into college. We have to show people that we're capable. There's so much pressure coming from all these different directions. And our culture is completely obsessed with aesthetics and bodies and what that means. For us, we have an inextricable link between what a body looks like and what we think that means about that person's personal success and achievement. So when you're a young person trying to achieve things or trying to demonstrate that achievement, it's hard not to do what everyone else in the culture does, which is be like, here's my body. Do you see that I have abs? And therefore I'm a successful person who is disciplined, and I am so going to be such a success in my life. So in order for us to support our kids who are going through these moments, like, yeah, we have to look at where that comes from. We have to look at ourselves. I could not believe when she was saying that the parents were commenting on her body and she was getting it like secondhand from her friends.
From the kids. Yeah.
Kids. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just really think that this conversation cannot be had in an echo chamber. You know, we can't be wringing our hands about our kids and oh my goodness, they have these, they're on social media all the time. Yes, that's a problem. But there's plenty of conversations happening right in our own homes, or maybe on the sidelines of the track meet, or, in between the kids and the parents. These conversations are happening. And I don't think we're always willing to sort of step back and look at ourselves. Like, what are we contributing to this? Is it possible that the fact that I always buy the low-fat option of X food, or maybe I'm talking about how my clothing doesn't fit right, or I'm really looking up to or pointing to a particular athlete who's in a super lean body as like, oh, you want to look like that, or I want to look like that. And that's difficult stuff. It is very difficult for us to say, well, I'm not going to say these things around my kids, when we're saying it all day long. Just, it's
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought her quote at the end where she was giving advice to parents, like, don't let your child boil their identity down to one thing. I think that's really insightful and also hard to see coming, because sometimes you don't know what's happening in your child's mind, right? And I definitely, I grew up in a house where I had a sibling who had a certain struggle, right? It was not body image, but I remember, I've said this a lot as an adult, some of my parenting has been shaped around that experience, because even as a kid, I was aware that focusing on this challenge that my sister was having was absolutely going to heighten the challenge. We're focused on the challenge instead of all the things that she was capable of. We were focused on the one thing that seemed like she wasn't capable, and what are we gonna do? And I feel like that's just really, I feel like not making, you have to focus on the multitude of things that your child is good at and capable of, and just that's what you focus on is what you become, and is what you get out of, is where you end up. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I can tell you just by firsthand experience with many, many athletes who end up burned out and overtrained, it is very difficult for athletes to let go of that identity. And when they have to go through, let's say, a recovery from an injury or overtraining, or maybe they ended up, with hypothalamic amenorrhea and they don't have a period, they know they have to stop training. It is very disconcerting for them to have to go through that process of personal redefinition, because they very much feel as though not participating in whatever sport it is, they have lost who they are. And as much as I love sports, and as much as I love to be a part of this community, I know that the best parts of me and the best parts of all the athletes I work with, I can't see it from the outside, and it's not on Strava, and it's not on a podium, and it's not even in all the championships. It's really all about what's inside that person. And if we do not instill that idea in our kids from a very early age, we're going to end up creating people who are very reliant on one specific thing to give them the self-assurance that they need in life. And that's just not enough. We all need a lot more than that, especially now. So I think varying one's experience, especially giving our kids the opportunity to understand that if you don't have success here, you're going to have success elsewhere. There's so much more to you. You're multifaceted. You're not just one thing. I think that's invaluable. I'm so glad that Sarah was really forthcoming with her experience. I also wanted to talk to someone who is a professional and has the opportunity to work with athletes with eating disorders and disordered eating. So I invited Stephanie Roth-Goldberg on. She's LCSW and a certified eating disorder specialist. She's in the New York area. She focuses on eating disorders and disordered eating in athletes. She works with athletes of all ages, genders, and levels, and she helps them reach athletic goals while healing their relationship to food and their bodies. So let's hear from Stephanie.
we know that these issues don't come from nowhere, right? So how do you see evidence of parents' thoughts and ideas about body image and diet? How do you see this show up when you have a patient come in to your office who is a young person with an eating disorder? Tell me about like the parents' ideas and mindsets having an influence on that kid's experience.
One thing I always say, and I say this to professionals, I try and say this to parents, is a parent or caregiver's external dialogue becomes the child's internal dialogue. How children make sense of the world is by learning from the people who teach them, which would be their parents, right? So one of the things I ask kids a lot is just a simple like, how's food talk? Pretend I'm in your kitchen. What is the dialogue? What are we talking about at breakfast? What's being served? Is there commentary? Like, pretend I'm a fly on the wall and act out a scene. And often, well, that's where kids might not be conscious of the fact that there's comments like, oh, you can have cereal. I would never drink whole milk. I'm on a diet. Or we're going to use almond milk now because we're trying to get fit for lacrosse season. So let's change the whole, whatever it is, right? Like, and often when you have kids talk to you, and I'll say it, like, pretend it's a scene, like, what's your sister saying? What's your brother saying? What's your dad doing? Or it'll be like, oh, no, my parents don't eat breakfast. The kids can eat breakfast, but definitely I've never seen my mother eat breakfast. Or my dad's at the gym and then he has a scoop of protein powder. And so you can really begin to see how this gets shaped from inside someone's kitchen of what the parents are saying, and then how children at any age think about what they're putting in their body is highly influenced by what their parents are saying about it. So that's one way in which I begin to kind of get an experience of what's happening in people's homes.
Can you think of any specific examples? I really would like to help parents sort of like look along the course of their day and think about places where their commentary or even just the way they regard themselves. I've seen a lot of times, the way we look at ourselves in the mirror, for example, if our kids are watching us, like, what are they seeing? So maybe some either external signs or even nonverbal signs of ways that we are putting that negative message in our kids' head.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of times where you'll notice parents, we can generally tell when someone's uncomfortable in their body, right? They're like pulling out their shirt or they're sort of doing something with so these are some of the nonverbals, right? Like you could just tell that something is uncomfortable and they're fixating on their body. So that is one way where I do find that the nonverbal happens a lot. Or you walk by a window or mirror and people are body checking. And then maybe they even say something like, the shirt is so unflattering. Why did I wear these jeans? They don't fit. Or something that is kind of an internal thought that they externalize. And then their kid will look at their shirt a little differently, right? And look at their own shirt, look at the parent's shirt. Some other examples that may be communicated, may not, will be things such as, I'm going to dinner later, I'm not eating lunch. Sometimes people say that out loud. Or sometimes they don't. They'll get to dinner and say, oh, I'm so hungry. I haven't eaten all day because I knew we were coming to this restaurant. And those are the kind of messages that are confusing, because then the kids are like, oh, I ate lunch and probably had a snack. Can I order the same amount for dinner? It becomes a question in children's minds of what am I doing something wrong if my parents are playing by totally different rules?
Yeah. Can you explain body checking for people who might not know what that is?
Yes, absolutely. So it's, if you're in front of a mirror or let's say your reflection of a window, you really are looking at generally a specific body part and kind of like maybe you're pinching your skin, maybe you are really just fixating on like the waist of your jeans, but you're really looking at your body with a critical eye. And it's usually pretty obvious because you're pausing there for a moment and you're kind of maybe fidgeting, maybe pinching your skin, that kind of thing, rather than just walking by a mirror and walking by it. Even if you catch a glimpse of your reflection, you're not usually pausing.
I feel like a lot of this stuff is, being honest, like left over from diet culture from like the 70s, 80s, 90s, depending on how old we are. And it's this obsession with, I feel like there's this obsession with weight loss as a proxy for like achievement.
Absolutely.
So therefore, you need to kind of follow this body ideal. How do we get that old antiquated idea out of parents' heads that like a runner has to look like a certain thing because that's how you achieve success?
Some of it, I think, is basic education, right? If we knew, okay, this is what our body does, that we can prepare ourselves, we can prepare our children, this is what puberty is. Our bodies are changing and growing in this specific phase of life. Wouldn't we just say, oh, good, our bodies are doing the thing they're supposed to be doing? Of course you're gaining weight and muscle and breasts. And here's what, like, I think some of it is a basic education. And girls drop out of sports during puberty it's like one of the biggest dropout years. And I think that's because also sports aren't designed for that to be something that's accepted and talked about and understood. And I wonder about why girls always, there's some research about that's a big dropout rate. And I often wonder, is it because they feel not good enough? Is it because they're told they're not good enough because of their body changes?
Yeah. I think it's all of the above. Plus, I've been harping on this thing about the uniforms that they have to wear.
Absolutely, yes.
That really contributes to an emphasis on what your body looks like and how good you look in your uniform, equating to how good you're going to be in your sport. I think a lot of it is tied up in that. I can imagine that must be really difficult to navigate. Obviously, parenting is difficult, and I have all the respect in the world for that as someone who does not have children. And we certainly don't want to tell parents, like, we don't want to make them scared to talk to their kids, right? But are there any, like, red alert comments or behaviors that you can be like, this right here is something you should not do?
Oh, yeah, I have a whole list of those.
All right, great.
So one of them is talk about other people's bodies. Even parents might say, oh, did you notice so-and-so? She gained a lot of weight this year. She looks bigger. That shirt, again, like flattering is a word I hear a lot of people say. And you're right, especially on the sidelines of certain sports where they're wearing uniforms that like just aren't flattering for anyone. But we can talk about how the uniforms might be unfair that girls have to wear them, but flattering is a really red alert word for a lot of people. It brings immediate attention to a body part that they then often fixate on. But when parents talk about other people's weight, it becomes the lens in which we look through. Oh, that person's good. They didn't look at them. They lost weight. That person's bad. Oh, they gained weight. What does that mean? And it just becomes like that's the lens that people have to look through. So that's a red alert, I think. Again, this idea of talking about health a lot when really people mean thin, because it's confusing and it's misdirected. And it often leads kids to fixate on, is this processed? What does processed mean? Can I eat processed food? And then kids are really spiraling to make sense of what they can eat and what they can't eat. That is definitely a red alert. And I think particularly with girls in sports is divorcing the idea of exercise and food. We need to teach kids they can fuel their bodies to, you have to fuel your body before a game. You have to fuel your body before you do this. And if you ate that, you also don't have to burn it off. You don't have to earn your food. Because a lot of high school students I see internalizing that idea. Oh, I should go to the gym because we ate at a restaurant last night. So I ate more than normal. So I'm going to do a few extra laps before practice kind of thing.
Yeah, that's very powerful. That's right. So a very tricky subject to broach is that there are athletes that I have worked with in the past, I know that you have worked with in the past, that are trying to get into college, right? Mm-hmm. And today, getting into college, particularly in the United States, is so complicated. And there's so much competition. And it is so expensive. And there's so much investment put into trying to make that happen. And in some occasions, there have been times where young women who have gotten scholarships to be able to attend college are getting those scholarships on these incredible performance times that ended up putting them into an eating disorder, disordered eating, amenorrhea. They're not getting a period. They are very close to breakdown, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think from talking to athletes on some level, they may even know it. They are fearing like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Mm-hmm. And then how do we then impart the idea to our kids that, how do we release that pressure of like, they're trying to get into school and they're doing so on a potentially broken body? How do we address that?
You're right. It's so complicated. I wish that I didn't have so much experience with this particular sort of client presentation. I have 2 in my practice right now, who, it's February when we're recording this, and their scholarships are, for the fall. There is an opportunity here to teach the kids themselves that their body is talking to them. Because you're right, most of the time, this person that you're describing, this athlete, does know they're on the verge of breaking. They can barely maintain what they're doing. And other areas of their life are sort of beginning to fall apart in some kind of way. Their social life, or they're fighting with their parents more because they may not understand that they're in a bad mood all of the time because they're undernourished and under so much pressure. I think that what's really tricky is when the scholarship is the only way for them to go to college. Financially, it's otherwise not going to be an option, or at least at that school. And so I think family work has to be done here with the idea that, is this child allowed to say they don't want to play sports? Can we say, maybe you need a gap year and we'll figure out a state school or some other version? Because a lot of times kids do not feel as though that is an option. But when they want to play sports, it also can be a really good motivator, because it's tricky to get them all of the support they need to nourish themselves enough so that they're no longer on the point of breaking. But I'll do work with kids and I'll just say, take me to a happy place. I just did this last week with someone. Any happy place that you could think of. Let's calm your nervous system down. And this kid, amazingly, she brought herself into the middle of a lacrosse field, and she described this whole goal of her. She walked me through the whole scene of her scoring a goal, everyone clapping their sticks, and you could tell that was her happy place. So I'm like, okay, this is where you want to be. We can get you there with the right support. But it means you need to recover your period, which might need some time off. You need to eat enough, so let's get a dietitian on board, right? Let's get you a support team that gets you where you want to be. But I think it's essential that kids have that autonomy to decide, I do want to do that. Because also being a college athlete is a tremendous amount of work. It's not the same as just going to college and being a college student.
Parents may not catch all the things that their kids are exposed to all day long, but they may notice something pretty visceral, like their kid is no longer getting a period. Mm-hmm. And we confirm that there is never an occasion when a young female loses her period that we should not be concerned.
Yes, absolutely. It is wild to me that that still exists, that is something to be praised, the lack of period. Like a loss of period, again, if we go back to bone health, which we need our whole life. Yes, that requires immediate attention every time.
Okay, excellent. And since we don't have a doctor weighing in on this particular episode, but you and I both know the answer to this question, I would love for you to just confirm for me that if the young woman, let's say, has lost her period and we take her to a doctor who puts her on a birth control pill to get her period, can we confirm that is not an acceptable remedy for hypothalamic amenorrhea, please?
Absolutely confirmed. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. I feel like that's probably going to blow a lot of minds, but I just want to make that clear to everyone listening that if you take your kid to the gynecologist and they put her on a birth control pill, you are not fixing the problem. You are actually potentially masking it, making it worse. That is an anovulatory cycle, and she is not menstruating normally or of her own body's accord.
Okay, Jill, I really appreciated Stephanie's comments about how parents self-talk. And I think I said this a little bit earlier, how parents self-talk is what your kids absorb. And then the secondary point about how parents' nonverbal communication you can totally tell when someone is uncomfortable with their body or not, right?
Yeah.
So I just appreciate it. I'm like, yes, like we need to start with ourselves and how we think about our bodies, how we talk about our bodies, and getting comfortable with how we are.
Yeah, it's so true. And what's amazing is that once your ears kind of tune into not only your own self-talk, what's going on in your head, you start to see it everywhere. You start to see evidence of it everywhere. In movies, in books, in the way, like advertisements, there's this constant drumbeat of something that I usually call the transactional relationship between food and exercise. There's this just assumption that it's normal to think I eat when I earn it through physical activity. And that concept, it really permeates the way we talk to ourselves, and it permeates the way we talk about food and nutrition, even in a household sometimes. And we may not even be aware of it because we're thinking that, oh yeah, well, everyone talks like this. But just the fact that everyone talks like this does not mean that it is creating an environment that is going to lead to a healthy athlete who has a good relationship to her body and to food. If we continue to have this issue, we're doing something wrong. And I think, as you said, this is a great place to start and take a look inside what we might be doing wrong here.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation with a young woman, actually who works with us. And when this goes back a few years. So she was maybe 19 or 20. And she said to me, Sarah, we are now, like myself and my squad, she's on a kind of high-level triathlon squad. We understand that we need to be eating more. Like we've got that message. We got it. But I don't know actually what to focus on. Like, how much do I eat? How, I was like, oh yeah, we actually need to replace this message of like, don't get an eating disorder with like a positive and at the time I was like, what does she need to focus on? I actually was stumped by the question. But now years later, I'm like, no, what you need to focus on is eating enough to maintain your training. And if you don't know what that is, go find out.
Yeah, it's true. I think diet culture plays a role here. I mean, when we grew up, I know that every woman in my orbit was on a diet. And so there was no conversation about, are you eating enough? It was celery sticks. The message there was about what can we do to trick our bodies to eat less so that we can kind of get through the day. And so I know that as a young athlete, there was really not discussion about eating enough. No one ever said you need to eat enough. So having this discussion around like what is necessary to fuel not just sport, but also these young people that we're trying to send into the world with everything they need to achieve things and to be successful, that requires energy. And it's just, it is a missed point, and it's all about, because again, like I said, everything goes back to aesthetics. And sometimes, and people have to really get comfortable with this, aesthetics do not match up with adequate fueling or adequate performance. There are some occasions where if you want to perform like an athlete, the vision of what you think you're going to look like, it may not line up. And that is okay. That is okay.
Yeah. And I think really that it takes, to get there into that mindset, I think it takes this refocus on focusing on what your body can do rather than what it looks like. Yeah. Because ultimately then you end up in the right place for a sport, right? Because sport, at the end of the day, it is about what your body can do. Like you're learning new skills, you're trying to go faster, you're trying to lift more weight. Like there are some performance markers that really we should be focusing on.
Yeah, definitely
rather
true.
than weight loss.
Definitely true. And also all the things you're describing right now are all the reasons why we want our kids to play sports in the first place, right? Because it makes them a well-rounded person. They learn how to struggle with things, to dig in. They learn how exciting it is to learn those new skills and to find that their bodies can do these amazing new things. And then you hear from Stephanie that girls drop out of sports in puberty. And that just killed me right there, because I honestly don't think I would have got through high school without sports. I mean it. Well, yeah. Imagine. Yeah, what does that say about us? Why are girls dropping out of sports in puberty?
Yeah, it was the same for me. I had Dr. Alex Coates on the podcast again a while back, and we had she's an exercise scientist. We had a really interesting conversation about puberty. And to summarize, because I'm not an exercise scientist, but she really dug into how, in puberty, girls, their performance will tend to plateau or sometimes even drop. And so if we have coaches and parents understanding and expecting that, and that's from quite a young age, like my daughter was in puberty at 10, So, and that's frequent. And it can last a long time too. We also hear from athletes who still are coming out of the tail end of puberty in their 20s. So if we don't expect that linear progression that we would see or expect in men's sports for young girls, then I think we can change the game completely. Like if we refocus that time on skill learning or like ongoing development within, with understanding that your body's changing, right? So sometimes the sideways move is actually a step up in your performance. So I think it's just having coaches and parents understand that actually is the case for girls and the girls themselves knowing that that's okay. So they're less likely to go, oh, I'm not doing well anymore. I'm just going to drop out.
Yeah.
So I think that's one factor. I think there's a ton of factors because I think the entire infrastructure is just not set up to support girls well. And especially like we saw coming out of COVID, like the numbers were starting to get better. Like more girls were staying in sport through puberty ahead of COVID. And then coming out of COVID for whatever reason, because they weren't able to go, they didn't go back to sports. Like more girls didn't go back. So we had this kind of reversing of whatever ground we'd made up there. But, we know that there are tons of factors around that. Like our guests had talked about uniforms and that the idea that I think a lot of young girls don't see, and this is changing rapidly right now with the women's sports movement, but like actually having heroes that are women, they could say, look at this pro athlete, I can be like her. I think that's a game changer, for a young girl. So I think there are things that are changing, but the infrastructure at every level, like from coaching to understanding the girls' attitudes themselves, to making them comfortable in their uniforms, to culturally how we talk about bodies, etc. Like there's infinite number of ways that we can make quick changes on this.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that we have to be careful that we're not talking out of both sides of our mouth. We're like talking about all this body acceptance and all these, willingness to let bodies change. And then we're putting our track girls in booty shorts or like, little tiny pants. And we're saying, okay, go out there. It doesn't line up. It really doesn't. And that kind of stuff really bothers me because I know for a fact that, again, I go back to my own experience. I remember being faced with, what is going to be I can't remember if it was like spring sport or whatever. And I know that volleyball was 100% off the table for me because I was not putting my butt in those shorts. That wasn't going to happen. And that was the reason. That was the reason why I didn't want to go for volleyball. I played volleyball in the summer, but there was no way I was getting in those shorts. And I ended up playing lacrosse, which, by the way, not to date myself, but back in the 90s, we had to wear skirts playing lacrosse. Yes, I know. But at least they covered. I mean, I just know that I did not have the body confidence as a young girl to be putting myself in teeny tiny spandex outfits. So if we're going to really put our money where our mouth is and we're going to try to be more, we want our girls to be easier on themselves, maybe we have to stop and, as you said, re-examine the infrastructure and say to ourselves, is this what we really want to be telling people? That the barrier for entry into this sport is, how good do you look in this outfit? I mean, come on, that's not conducive.
Yeah, that actually hit me in my heart when you said, because I did play volleyball, 7th, 8th grade, 9th grade, and we had baggy shorts.
Oh, baggy shorts.
Volleyball, yeah.
So you were able to wear, so they were not like the teeny tiny little like.
Oh. I was like, oh man, imagine that, because I would have felt the same as you. If someone had been like, this is the uniform, and I had to wear tiny shorts. Yeah, be out.
Yeah.
And Jill, before we go, I just want to thank you for your comment about the birth control pill at the very end of Stephanie's interview not being a solution to amenorrhea. I had, when I was 14, 15 years old, I was put on birth control because of, get this here, it wasn't amenorrhea, but I was tested and had high levels of testosterone, like just outside the normal levels for girl, which probably now looking back, I'm like, it probably was totally normal and it wasn't a thing. And so I think about that now, like, I'm so glad that we are getting past that point of thinking that somehow the pill is an answer to any hormonal or cycle-related perceived challenges in young girls.
Particularly in young girls. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say this, but I do think that it has to do with the fact that back in the day, the doctors who were doing this were trying to make the person feel pacified by the idea that they're bleeding, right? And I think that it is important that we remember that girls need to have an ovulatory cycle. That is the goal. So it's not just the period, we need to ovulate. That's really where all the magic is happening. So that needs to be at the forefront of the whole issue.
So thank you so much, Jill, for this conversation. Our first episode in the series. Tell us what's coming next.
Yeah. So in the next part of the series, we're actually going to talk to a coach of a high school team, a male coach of a girls' track and cross country team. And we're going to dive in with him to understand what kind of mindset he had around creating this space for the conversation around women's health in his teams and how he actually goes about doing that. It's so important because he has been able to really change the way that all of this topic is approached in that community. And he's done such a great job with it. So we're going to talk to him and get some real practical advice. I'm hoping that coaches can tune in and really get a good toolbox of information from that. And you and I are going to chat a little bit about some of the studies out there in the academia world that have looked at the coach-athlete relationship to understand whether or not that has an impact on the development of things like eating disordered and disorders eating in athletes and also other sort of mental health issues. So we're going to look at that from the academia side and the practical side with Jason Russo, our coach.
Amazing. Well, I am excited. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah.